I saved for 11 years to buy that house, and I did it without telling a single person. Not my mother, not my best friend, not my older brother who would have had an opinion about every square foot of it. Nobody. That wasn't bitterness talking. It was just something I learned early. The moment you share a dream out loud, everyone feels entitled to weigh in on it. And I had enough people in my life who were very good at weighing in. My name is Faye. I'm 31. I work as a radiologic technologist at a hospital in Columbus, and I have worked rotating shifts, days, nights, weekends, holidays, since I was 22 years old. I picked up overtime when I could. I drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard until last year. I packed my lunch every single day for a decade. I didn't take a real vacation until I was 28. And even then it was a long weekend in Tennessee because a coworker had a cabin and invited me for free. I wasn't depriving myself. I just knew what I wanted, and I kept my eye on it. The house was a 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in a suburb about 20 minutes from the hospital. Mature trees in the backyard. Original hardwood floors. A kitchen with enough counter space that you could actually cook a real meal. I found it in March, closed in May, and moved in on a Saturday morning in June when it was already 83 degrees and I was sweating through my shirt carrying boxes from a rented truck by myself. I didn't mind. I was so happy I could have cried. I set up my coffee maker first. That was the rule I made for myself. Coffee maker goes in before anything else, so the first thing you do in your new home is make yourself a cup of coffee and stand in your own kitchen and just feel it. I stood there for a long time that morning, barefoot on those hardwood floors, holding a mug I'd had since college, looking out the window at the backyard. I thought, nobody can take this from me. I don't know why that specific thought came to me in that moment. Maybe I always knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that something like what happened was eventually going to happen. Maybe I just knew my brother well enough. His name is Cole. He's 36. He married his wife, Brot, when they were both 25, and they have 3 kids, 7, 5, and 2. I love those kids. That part matters because what came later had nothing to do with the kids and everything to do with the 2 adults who were using them as leverage. Cole and Brot have always lived slightly beyond their means. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that was obvious to anyone outside the family, but in the particular way that people do when they're afraid of looking like they have less than they want. The cars were always a little too new. The vacations were carefully photographed. The house they rented was in a neighborhood they couldn't really afford, and they'd been renting it for 6 years because they could never quite get their down payment together. I helped when I could. Over the years, I'd lent Cole money, never large amounts, a few hundred here, a few hundred there, and I used the word lent loosely because I never saw any of it back, and eventually stopped thinking of it as a loan. I bought the older kids' birthday and Christmas presents that were nicer than I probably should have. When Brit's car needed a new transmission 2 years ago, I put $800 toward it because they were short and asked. I didn't do any of that to hold it over them. I did it because he's my brother and I thought that's what family did. But here's the thing about generosity. When someone receives it long enough, they stop experiencing it as a gift. It starts to feel like a floor beneath their feet, something that was always there and always will be. And once it feels like a floor, they stop being grateful for it and start being resentful when it's not there. I found that out the hard way. I told Cole about the house about 3 weeks after I moved in. I'd gotten settled enough that I felt ready to have people over. And I figured I'd invite him and Brit for dinner, show them the place, let the kids run around the backyard. I was proud. I wanted to share it. The dinner was fine. The kids were chaotic in the way that small children always are, and I didn't mind. Brit complimented the kitchen. Cole walked around nodding at things with that expression he gets where he's processing information he doesn't like, but hasn't decided what to do with it yet. After the kids were parked in front of a movie in the living room, we sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine, and that's when he said it. This is a lot of house for one person. I told him I liked having space. 3 bedrooms, though. He said it like he was just observing, just thinking out loud. What are you going to do with 3 bedrooms? I told him 1 was my bedroom, 1 was going to be a home office, and 1 was a guest room. Brit laughed a little. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh that means someone thinks you've said something slightly absurd. A whole room just for guests. Yeah, I said, that's pretty normal. Cole leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a moment in a way that made me feel like I was a budget line item he was reconsidering. You know, he said, we've been really cramped. The two older kids are sharing a room. Brody's in the pack and play in our room still because there's nowhere else to put him. I waited. A house like this, he said, would really change things for our family. I kept my voice very even. This is my house, Cole. I know that. He smiled like I'd misunderstood something. I'm just saying, you've got room. We've got need. Doesn't seem crazy to at least think about. Think about what exactly? Britt jumped in. It's a big house. Maybe we could work something out. Like an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? We'd help with expenses, Cole said quickly. It wouldn't be a free ride. I looked at them both and said very clearly that I had bought this house to live in alone, that I had worked for 11 years toward exactly this, that it wasn't an investment property and it wasn't a family compound, it was my home. Cole's expression shifted. The casual, thinking out loud quality drained out of it. You know how long we've been trying to buy, he said. You know how hard it is out there right now. I do know. It took me 11 years. That's not fair to compare. You don't have kids. That's a choice you made. It's not something I owe you a solution for. There was a silence that had some real weight to it. Britt said quietly, We thought you'd want to help your family. I have helped my family, I said. I've been helping for years. What I'm not going to do is give up my home because it has more square footage than you'd like. The evening ended not long after that. Cole was stiff when they left. Britt didn't say goodbye to me, just to the kids. I stood in my doorway and watched them load into their car and felt a specific kind of cold settle in my chest, the kind that tells you something has changed and isn't going to change back. Over the next few weeks, I heard from my mother. My mother is not a bad person. She loves her kids and she loves her grandkids, and she is constitutionally incapable of tolerating conflict without trying to mediate it into nothing. She called me 3 times in 2 weeks and each call had the same basic shape. She'd ask how I was. We'd talk for a few minutes. And then she'd work her way around to Cole and Britt and the kids, and how crowded their place was, and how stressed they were, and wasn't there some way I could just think about it more openly. The third call, I told her what I'd already told Cole. This is my home. I worked for it. I'm not reconfiguring my life around someone else's financial planning. She went quiet in the particular way she does when she's disappointed, but knows she can't argue. I just worry about the kids, she said finally. The kids are fine, Mum. Cole and Britt are adults. If they're struggling that badly, they need to look at their own finances. She didn't say much after that. I want to be clear about something. I didn't stop inviting Cole and Britt to things. I didn't cut them off. I didn't send some big declaration. I just held my ground and figured eventually they'd accept it and we'd move on. That was probably naive of me. My hospital schedule runs on a rotating block system. I work 4 days on, have 3 days off, then the rotation shifts. I'd been in the house about 2.5 months when I got called in for back-to-back overtime shifts over a weekend, both 12-hour days. It was the kind of weekend where I left early Saturday morning and didn't get home until late Sunday night, completely hollowed out. I remember driving home Sunday and just thinking about my bed and my blackout curtains. I pulled into my driveway and noticed that the light in the living room was on. I had not left that light on. My stomach did something unpleasant. I sat in my car in the driveway for a minute, going through the logical explanations. A timer. I didn't have light timers. Had I forgotten? I'd been exhausted, but I was pretty sure I hadn't left lights on at 6 a.m. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. I had put a camera system in 3 weeks after moving in, not because of anything specific, just because I lived alone and I was practical about it. Doorbell camera, one covering the driveway, one in the living room pointing toward the front door. I hadn't looked at the footage in a while because nothing had happened. I looked now. Saturday afternoon, around 2 o'clock. Cole's Tahoe in my driveway. I watched him walk up to my front door with the key in his hand and let himself in. Then Brit and the kids, they were in my house for 4.5 hours on Saturday. They came back Sunday morning and were there until just before I pulled in. I sat in my car and watched the footage twice. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I'd expected to feel shock, but what I actually felt was something more like clarity. The specific, cold clarity of something you'd suspected being confirmed. The question was how he had a key. I went back further in the footage, to the week after I'd had them over for dinner. There was an afternoon when I had a doctor's appointment, and I'd asked Cole to come by and let in a plumber I'd scheduled, a one-time thing, and I'd given him a spare key for that purpose. He was supposed to give it back when I got home. He hadn't, and I, stupidly, had not followed up. That was on me. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I knew who my brother was. I knew what that dinner conversation had meant. I should have followed up on that key the same day. It was a mistake, and it was mine, and I have made my peace with it. But here's the thing. One mistake does not create a right. Him having a key I forgot to get back did not give him permission to be in my home. Full stop. I got out of my car and walked inside. They'd cleaned up pretty well, I'll say that for them, but not well enough. There was a juice cup behind the couch, the kind with the sippy valve, obviously a toddler's. There were dents in the couch cushions, arranged exactly like you'd arrange them to put kids in front of a TV. In the guest room, the bed had been slept in, and the comforter was pulled up in that not quite right way. That means someone made the bed, but doesn't know exactly how you usually make it. They had slept in my house, in my guest room, with my linens. I took photos of everything. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and thought very carefully about what I was going to do. The next morning, I called a locksmith. New deadbolt on every exterior door, keyed differently from each other, brand new hardware. I also called my security system company and had them add window sensors and a time on every door so that I'd know the second any entry point was opened. While I waited for the locksmith, I drafted a text to Cole. I want to be clear that I did not send an emotional text. I did not write a paragraph about how betrayed I felt, or how this was unacceptable, or what I was going to do. I wrote 4 sentences. I know you were in my house this weekend. I have the security footage. I've changed all the locks. Do not come to this property without my explicit invitation. He called me within 5 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go too. Then Brit called. I let that go. Then my mother called, which meant Cole had already called her, which told me everything I needed to know about what story he was going to tell. His voicemail was almost impressive in the way it rearranged reality. He said they had thought I wouldn't mind, since I knew how hard things had been. He said the kids needed a yard and Brit had been so stressed. He said it was just a couple of nights, that they hadn't damaged anything, that they'd respected the space. He said I was being incredibly hurtful about a situation that was meant to come from a place of love, and that he hoped I would think about what was really important here. I listened to it twice. I called my mother back. She answered immediately. She'd been waiting. Cole told me what happened, she said. Did he tell you he used a key I gave him for one specific purpose, without asking, to let himself into my house twice while I was working overnight shifts? Pause. He said the two of you had we talked about it. I told him no. That was 2.5 months ago. He came into my house anyway. Another pause. I could hear her working through it. He didn't mean any harm by it, she said. He thought. Mom, it doesn't matter what he thought. He entered my home without my permission, twice. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. She was quiet for a long moment. So what are you going to do? I already did it. I changed the locks. I have the footage. If he comes onto my property again without being invited, I'll call the police. Faye, her voice had that pained quality that was supposed to make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. He's your brother. I know who he is. That's why I'm telling him, not filing a report tonight. But that's where we are. She didn't say much after that. For 2 weeks, Cole texted me every couple of days. They were a specific flavor of manipulation, not quite apologizing, just recasting everything in softer lighting. I think we got off on the wrong foot with this. The kids keep asking about your backyard. I just want us to be okay. None of them acknowledged that he had used a key without permission to enter my home while I wasn't there. I didn't respond. After 2 weeks, the text stopped. Then I got one from my aunt, who lives in Cincinnati and only calls when someone has died or when Cole has told her something dramatic. She told me that Cole was devastated and that I was suiting out the whole family over a misunderstanding and that I should extend some grace. I told her politely that I had extended grace for years in forms that Cole had never acknowledged, and that what happened was not a misunderstanding. She didn't reply. The silence stretched out. It had a different quality than I expected. Not the anxious silence of a conflict waiting to blow up, but something more settled. I went to work. I came home to my house. I drank coffee at my kitchen table in the mornings and looked out at my backyard. I missed my nephews in the uncomplicated way you miss kids when there are complicated adults between you. About 6 weeks after everything happened, my mother called with a different energy, less mediating, more just herself. I talked to Cole, she said. Really talked. Told him I wanted him to explain to me exactly what he thought was going to happen. I waited. He didn't have a great answer, she said. He thought you'd eventually just come around. He really did. She paused. That's a problem, isn't it? Yeah, I said. It is. I told him he owed you an apology, a real one. Okay, he's not ready to give one yet. She said it plainly without spinning it. I don't know if he will be. I wanted you to know I said it. I appreciated that. More than I said. Cole reached out a few weeks after that, with something that was closer to an apology than anything before. He said he had overstepped, that he'd been under a lot of pressure and hadn't been thinking straight, that he understood why I was angry. He didn't take full responsibility. He didn't mention the keys specifically, or the fact that they'd slept in my house, or any of the detail, but it was something. I told him I hurt him and that I needed more time. That was honest. I did need more time. We've talked since then, careful, surface-level conversations, where we're both aware of the distance between us and neither of us knows yet how to close it. The kids are fine. My nephews don't know anything happened. To them, Aunt Faye is just someone they don't see as often as they used to, and that will change when I'm ready to let it. What I know now that I want to say to anyone who might be in something like this, if you have built something by yourself, through years of work and patience and saying no to things so you could one day say yes to the thing that mattered most, you do not owe anyone access to it just because you love them. Generosity is a choice. It is never a debt. The morning after I changed the locks, I made coffee and stood in my kitchen barefoot and looked out at my backyard again. Same house, same floors. Same mug. The thought I had that first morning came back. Nobody can take this from me. I'd had to prove it this time. But it was still true. I've thought a lot about what made Cole believe he could walk into my home and sleep in my bed and let his kids run through my yard without asking. And I don't think it was malice exactly. I think it was something quieter and harder to name, the slow accumulation of never being told no. Every time I handed over money without being asked twice. Every time I didn't follow up on the key. Every time I absorbed the discomfort so he didn't have to feel it. I built that floor beneath him one board at a time, and then I was surprised when he walked on it like it belonged to him. That's the part that stays with me, not what he did, but what I allowed to make it possible. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences actually work. Not in some grand, cosmic sense, but in the ordinary, daily way that choices stack up into outcomes. Cole didn't end up at my door with a copied key because of one bad decision. He ended up there because of 100 small decisions, his and mine both, that nobody ever stopped to examine. He learned that wanting something from me was usually enough to get it. I learned that keeping the peace was easier than holding a line. Neither of us was paying attention to what we were building. The night I sat in my car in the driveway watching the security footage, I felt something I didn't expect. I thought I'd feel betrayed or furious or hollowed out. Instead, I felt clear, like I'd been handed the exact proof I needed to stop second-guessing what I already knew. Cole had been telling me for years, in 100 indirect ways, how he saw me as a resource, as a fallback, as someone whose hard work existed to cushion his choices. The footage was just the first time he said it out loud. What I did next, changing the locks, sending that 4-sentence text, not answering the calls, wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that. There was nothing satisfying about it in the moment. It just felt like the first time I'd acted in proportion to what was actually happening, instead of absorbing something I should have refused. That's the intelligence part, I think. Not cleverness, not strategy, just the willingness to see a situation accurately and respond to what's real instead of what you wish were true. I wished my brother was the kind of person who would have apologized immediately, who would have said he crossed a line and meant it. He wasn't ready to be that person. Pretending otherwise wouldn't have made it true. The discipline I'm proudest of isn't the 11 years of saving. It's the part after, staying quiet when every instinct said to explain myself, standing in the discomfort of my mother's disappointment, not softening my position just because holding it was lonely. That kind of steadiness isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice, usually in smaller moments, until you need it for a big one. I don't know exactly where things land with Cole long term. We're talking. It's careful. I've let myself miss my nephews without letting that become a lever someone can use against me. That's new for me. Holding two true things at once without letting one cancel the other out. What I know is this. The house is still mine. The floors are still the same floors. The coffee still tastes the same in the morning. I didn't lose anything by holding my ground. I just found out what I was actually made of. That turned out to be enough.